Hello world! As further proof that I absolutely suck at live reactions, we're here today to correct yesterday's assumptions concerning the lore of the Icarus Fleet and the Olympus Infestation, laying out all the solid information that we do have, along with some speculation on its overall context, to get us ready for Season 9's larger story. So, we start with the Legacy gameplay pre-trailer, where Olympus's central computer system receives an incoming transmission from the ship Icarus, and confirms in turn that Olympus was its dock of origin, and that the fleet callback had been received. So, the Icarus was originally sent out from Olympus with the intent of returning, and the map update patch notes also tells us that their trip went through deep space, to give some context for how extensive that trip may have originally been, and how long ago it might have begun. Which brings us back to the present, where an alert from Olympus now tells us that this return protocol has been overwritten, or overridden, which then deletes the Icarus Fleet's ID log, but then Olympus is still authorized to terraform itself so as to dock the main ship, the Icarus, next to the Bonsai Plaza. And yet, as the Icarus is landing, Olympus also announces a security perimeter alert, claiming the Icarus Fleet to be multiple unknown ships entering their secure space. And so, with security forces in place, the Icarus is locked in, its precious cargo is unveiled, and the infestation begins. So, we have an old Olympian fleet that flew too close to the sun and came back burned, and then we have someone else that didn't want the Icarus to be recognised properly when it did finally return. And it seems that this sabotage may not have been to prevent the Icarus from landing, as you'd assume a fleet callback would want, because the Icarus still ended up docked into Olympus. And that could mean that the fleet callback protocol was actually there to prevent the Icarus from docking in the first place, which Olympus may have done to maintain quarantine, which it only would have done if it knew of the fleet's potentially hazardous cargo. However, this protocol sabotage could also have made Olympus's orbital cannon attack the ships, which would have loosed the infestation then as a bioweapon so as to prevent it from being harvested safely, rather than for the Saboteur to, say, take it for themselves, which could obviously still be their ultimate goal. This obviously would still depend on the Icarus fleet being sent out directly for this specific plant material and the motives of the mysterious Saboteur, but it doesn't have to be the way the infestation spread. That's just speculation, right? And so, we come to the mysterious Flora itself, with the map updates describing the infestation as a viscous, parasitic plant of unknown origin. The roots of this plant seem to grow at ridiculous speeds and to gargantuan proportions, here seen linking the entire fleet together and further connecting the largest vessel to the Bonsai Plaza. Here we can also see what seems to be a byproduct or a further agent of the plant's ecological processes, as an emission of dark viscous sap allows the roots to bind to even inorganic material, such as Olympus or the Bonsai Plaza, for the roots to then form stronger bonds around. Whether this sap can deconstruct such material for the plant to then sustain itself is unclear, but it's likely that we do know how the samples were able to gain nutrients during their voyage, as the scientists looking after those samples have now been found as victims of their own hubris and the lethal growth of this strange plant life. Which takes us inside the Icarus, where we can find further features of the flora, with collections of bulbous growths emitting purple smoke and writhing with black, oily tendrils. These bulbs and their tendrils seem to have some kind of reaction to sunlight as seen here, whether for forming solid roots from the viscous tendrils, or to release some kind of spores or seeds, or even as an adverse reaction as sunlight decays the newly forming material. While details of that process are so far unclear, the fumes emitted are most likely to have led to the scientists' deaths, and the scientist's remains then helped fuel the plant's growth until reaching Olympus. But upon arriving at Olympus, the roots have finally been able to spread like absolute wildfire, perhaps even breaching the ship's hulls themselves, which further suggests some kind of beneficial reaction with sunlight, just like photosynthesis. So, altogether, this evidence gives us our two most likely possibilities for the plant's origins, as samples of alien flora, or as a bioengineered superplant. The Icarus's long voyage does suggest a trip to something like Titanfall 2's Exoplanet, where similar alien flora can actually be seen, but the traversal through deep space could also have been part of the methods for bioengineering existing plant life into the monstrosity that we see now. Then, both of those outcomes suggest the collection or production of natural resources for things such as infrastructure from the giant roots or nutritional and medicinal properties from the bulbs, as these industries are very stable footholds that Olympus and its owners have gained within the Outlands economy, especially tied to the ecologically focused Grow Foundation, which obviously has a home on Olympus, but seems to also be tied to the aforementioned exoplanet. Then, the ship's name of Icarus should also suggest the idea to you of flying too close to the sun, which would indicate that the Icarus's mission was viewed with great importance, or at least worth great risk. This actually pairs quite well with the original carrier ship on the other side of Olympus, the Arcadia, which also represents a utopian ideal of harmony with nature. But then the reason that this plant life may have been viewed as flying closer to the sun by comparison, or even worth substantially more risk, could be through its use, as we see here, as a bioweapon. However, all of these considerations seem rather smaller scale than the prior century's energy crisis, handily solved by Pathfinder, and so it likely came about much more recently than that. But this gathering of fundamental resources are still definite considerations for a group tightening its control over the Outlands, such as the Syndicate or Hammond Robotics. Lifeline in particular has already spoken of the need for Olympus's agricultural tricks to be spread to the wider Outlands. So perhaps the Icarus's mission is a part of how the Syndicate have established control across the Outlands, where certain planets will struggle to provide resources due to damaged or volatile terrain. With that in mind then, which legends might have an interest in this mysterious plant life, and why? We'll start with the one that actually brought me here. Bloodhound, for a start, could have a lot of interest in the plant life itself, for elements leaning towards infrastructure, giving them clues on how they could help to restore the ecological stability of somewhere like World's Edge, using these giant overgrowing roots to bind some of the more stable landmass together. Lifeline then, as mentioned, could be interested in the plant life to offer something like food resources to the Frontier Core, helping out the wider Outlands, or for some kind of medicinal properties of the plant itself, which again are probably closest to the Icarus's original mission goals. Although, if Ash's sets of purely numerical codes that you might remember from the Broken Ghost have anything to do with the Icarus mission, this could be what allowed Lifeline to be the Saboteur, as Octane insists that they should both know specifically what the numbers mean, and having access to those numbers could allow Lifeline to manipulate the Fleet Callback protocol, and lines up pretty well with, as I've mentioned, her being against Olympus hoarding their agricultural methods, and it also benefits from Lifeline's history on Olympus, giving her the potential understanding of the Icarus mission itself. And if you thought that was a ridiculous tangent, I'm going back to Ash, and by extension also to Horizon. Those two I can see being interested not specifically in the plant, but in its black sap. And admittedly, only if the plant is a bioengineered one. And why do I say this? Why do I say anything? Because all roads lead to Branthium. I bring Branthium up again in terms of a bioengineered plant, in that the black sap is not a product of the plant itself originally, but is a further refinement of Branthium used to stimulate biological processes. Branthium itself, as a substance, is able to store incredible amounts of energy, and has the ability to manipulate gravitational forces to the extent of manipulating space-time. There's also potentially multiple refinements of Branthium that we've seen within the universe that lead to slightly different properties. We have something like the Arc from Titanfall 2, which is possibly the purest refinement of Branthium, working largely as a power source for the fold weapon, but also definitely having some kind of gravitational effects. You then have something like the Time Gauntlet from Titanfall 2's mission Effect and Cause, which allows the user to jump back and forth between the present and a fixed point in the past, and even allowed them to move around within a time-stopped explosion. You then have someone like Horizon, who has specifically geared her Branthium towards producing purely gravitational forces for their gravitational effects directly, which is in comparison to someone like Loba, who is seemingly using those gravitational forces to fold herself through space-time. You've even got characters like Revenant, whose totem could well be quantum pinning you in place and then entangle your actions into the surrounding atoms of the universe. It could make you physically uncertain, splitting you into a wave and a particle. It could, to an extent, half push you into the void. There's all sorts of crazy shit that Branthium can do, but again, to bring us back to the actual point at hand, my idea here is that for further research into Branthium, that obviously Horizon and seemingly Ash are very much in want of, examining a further refinement of Branthium that stimulates organic biological processes through manipulation of space-time could just be a further avenue for those two to explore their crazy time travel nonsense, right? That even then opens you up to characters like Wraith, searching for similar answers to explore her past with Project Wraith. Then finally, coming back down to Earth a little bit more, I can see the roots themselves offering great test samples for Caustic. Firstly, giving him endless organic matter to see how his toxin degrades things, or he could even find certain chemicals within the plant bulbs that provide some benefit or other effect to his research, maybe even linked into the ecological systems that produce the spiders that give him his toxin. Something like that would prompt Caustic to actually be way further on the side of keeping the plant around to offer us a further antagonist within this arc, as I assume most of the quest of Season 9 is going to be about getting rid of the infestation. However, this plant could well be an avenue for Caustic to earn some kind of redemption in Watson's eyes. As she said, he will be a good man, whether he wants to or not. But it's better if he wants to, right? And the way he could do this would be by being the person to destroy the plant in its entirety for altruism, rather than doing it piece by piece for research, which in itself opens you up to him using his super toxin from Caustic treatment to remove the infestation in one fell swoop, removing his opportunities for research, which then makes his growth absolute, as he would be making a double sacrifice. Sacrificing the toxin, which offers him results regardless of the organic matter that he tests it on, and then also losing the giant, seemingly endless test subject of the giant alien Flora. That's how you actually prove that Caustic's growth was done purely for the sake of being a better person, rather than him doing any of it to cure his life-threatening disease. However, despite that potential end game that we will reach with this, maybe further seasons, I'd actually quite like the roots to stay around. I'd like to see them grow and change over time to give us some new kinds of proper terrain on Olympus as this story develops or even concludes, as I said. It'd be good to see some characters almost try to stick up for the plant for their own reasons, creating conflict within the legends. And this all certainly feels very possible as the dev team apparently see this part of Season 9's arc as laying the groundwork for their ambitions of adding to Olympus's lower number of POIs and pushing the story generally into the future. So, with Olympus's Infestation and Ash's Arenas taking tandem duty as our core conceits for Season 9, Legacy surely is the name of the game, as all our world's history comes back to bite us. I'm super excited to see this develop into something like Event Horizon meets like Little Shop of Horrors, like with a giant sentient plant bursting out of the ship demanding to be fed legends by the dozen. But with that's maybe a step too ridiculous, and I think that's all that can actually be said about the Olympus Infestation and the Icarus Fleet, for now. So hopefully this video has given you some decent context for exploring Season 9's story, and we'll see sooner or later how right I actually am. Thank you for staying with me, friends. I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Take care of yourselves out there, teammates, and may the glorious light of Best Girl shine within you. Bye-bye.